Welcome to the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today we're going to be talking about fee matrices and how you can use those on your different elements. And there's quite a few different methods that we will be using and different things that you can do with fee matrices that we'll be discussing. And we may end up splitting this into two different webinars to cover everything. A couple of the examples we're going to be sharing today specifically will be how you can set up a credit card fee that will automatically calculate a certain percentage based on which terms you're using on a quote. And we're also going to look at how you can set up certain subtotals that are there mostly just for display purposes so that you can see what the total is for different resource types on the quote. And then we might look at a couple other ones pending time. But if not, like I said, we will do a part 2 for next week. Let's start by looking at where you can find these fee matrices. So on the Financials menu, if you click Fee Matrices, that will bring up the list of any fee matrix that you have in your system. If you haven't created any yet, then this would be blank. But as you can see, I have a few created already, and we'll look at how we set these up in just a minute. I also just want to introduce a couple of other concepts that are related to the fee matrix. Number one, we're going to go to the Projects menu, click Project Elements, and since we're primarily going to be working on the quote, we'll open the quote, Project Element Settings. And you'll notice that for every fee matrix that we set up, we're also going to set up a custom row in the element that we want to be able to use that fee matrix on. And so that's where we find our custom rows. And then also, if we want to be able to display the fee matrix that we've created, we're going to have to go to the document views of the element that we're working on and add it to one of the document views. I'll primarily be working in the working view for this webinar. And so I just wanted to show that quick overview so that you're somewhat familiar of the different areas that we're going to be working in today. We'll come back to these project element settings a little bit later. Let's start by looking how you can create a new fee matrix. It's just a simple matter of going over to our right-hand menu and clicking New Fee Matrix. Let me open up one of them that I have created already, and we can look at some of these fields and what they mean. So for example, let's open our credit card fee matrix, and let's also open our labor and rental, just so we can look at some of these different fields and why we set them for each of these different fee matrices. So the credit card fee, the first thing, of course, we do is just going to give it a name, and this can be anything you want. I just made it pretty simple, just call it the CC fee, but if I wanted, I could be a little more descriptive and actually call it the credit card fee. The code is more of an internal thing that Flex is going to use. A lot of times you'll notice that if you need to enter a code for something that you're creating, you may not ever use that code anywhere. This is one of the exceptions. I think we do actually use the code when we're setting up a custom row. So the code might be a little bit more important to you for a fee matrix when you're setting it up, and you might want to be a little bit more methodical in what you call that. The calculation mode is going to determine how this fee matrix is going to calculate. And you have a few options here. We have, is this going to calculate post any discount that we enter? Is it going to calculate pre any discount? And then the extended price cost, I believe this means it would calculate just based on what the extended price or cost is on your quote. So for example, you have the base price and then the extended price based on the quantity and time. I believe that's what the extended price / cost is calculating based on. For the most part, I usually will just stick with a post or a pre-discount because that seems to cover almost every type of fee matrix that I have set up. And then we also have a basis, and this is basically just going to determine what the outcome is going to be of this fee matrix. So again, the calculation mode is going to be how it gets calculated, and the basis is going to be what the outcome is. And so in this case, since it's a fee, an additional fee that we're going to be charging, I chose the price adjusted total. There's a few differences between these. So if I were to just choose price, then that would just calculate on the total price. But if I choose price adjusted total, then that will ignore the actual fee matrix that I'm setting up and only base it on the price itself. If we were to just choose price, we might risk getting into a loop where it's going to charge the price plus the fee, and we don't want that. We only want this to be based on the price adjusted total, which means that it's not going to take into consideration the credit card fee. Setting up a default percentage would just say, if I want everything, and we'll look at the different things that we can calculate different percentages on in a second, but if I set up a default percentage, that would just mean that anything on a quote, whether it be a rental or a retail line item or a miscellaneous line item or anything that appears on that quote, would have this default or have this fee matrix be applied to it. And that might not make a lot of sense now. Let's come back to this in a minute when we look at the different options that we can apply to a fee matrix. And to look at some of these options, I want to jump over to our labor or rental fee matrix that we set up. And again, if they don't make sense to you now, we will cover exactly what these are and what these mean. Right now, I just want to show the different options that you can set up in a fee matrix, and then we'll tie it all in together. So the first thing you can do is come down here and say, I want any resource line that appears on a quote to calculate a certain percentage. And so I might say, I want any resource line to calculate a 20% on top of what the total is for those resource lines. And then I could add that to this fee matrix. I could also narrow it down a little bit and say I only want it to calculate on miscellaneous lines. Or maybe I only want it to calculate on certain resource types. So in this example, since this is a labor fee matrix, I'm calculating 100% of all of the labor resource type that appears on any job. But I can come in here and add any of my resource types, like a rental or retail, then tell Flex how much I want this fee matrix to calculate off of that resource type, and then just click Add to add it to the list. In these examples, I'm just setting up a specific fee matrix to calculate for each specific resource type. So in this one, I'm only going to calculate 100% of labor, but I've also set up another one called rental, where I want the fee matrix to calculate 100% of my rental resource type. You also have the option to apply these different percentages only when you're using a certain location. We're not going to look at that too much in this webinar. We might do this in our part 2, but this might be useful if you have maybe like a hotel property is one of your business locations, and anytime that you use that business location, you want it to calculate a certain percentage that you might have to upsell for that location or something like that. But for these examples, we're just adding a resource type, the percentage that this fee matrix is going to calculate, and then added that to our list. And then the last thing that you can add and calculate certain percentages is a payment term. And so in this credit card fee matrix, we said if you're using a payment term that is Amex, then we want to calculate an overall 3% fee that will be added to that quote. And that would just cover the credit card fee that you're charged by Amex. And every credit card might have a slightly different fee. So I said if we were using the MasterCard payment term, then the percentage is going to be 3.5%. If we're using the Visa payment term, that percentage is only going to be at 2.5%. And just as a quick little detour on this, if you want to add more credit cards and different types of payment terms, you would just go up to your System Settings menu, click Payment Terms, and then this is where you can add the different payment terms. Just click a new payment term, enter the name, and if you want to learn more about what these other fields mean, I have a webinar on our YouTube page that talks specifically about payment terms, but we're not going to cover those specifically here. But if you want to add that new one, just click New Payment Term. But then you also have to go to the Project Elements on the Projects menu, and for any element that you want to be able to use that payment term, you're gonna have to click open that element, go to Accounting Options, and just enable them as accepted terms. So I've already enabled all of the payment terms that I have for my quote, but I can almost guarantee that there are a few for my invoice that I haven't enabled yet. And since I want to be able to use my fee matrices and payment terms on both my quote and have those push over to my invoice when I create an invoice, I'm also going to open my invoice project element settings. I'm going to go to the accounting options and just make sure that any of the payment terms that I want to be enabled for an invoice are checked, and then click Update. That's going to be another principle that I want you to make sure you understand, is that any fee matrix and custom row that I add to a quote, if I want those to be able to push properly over to an invoice, I'm going to have to open my invoice project element settings and do the same thing. We're not going to show too much of that repeat, but we'll at least make sure you understand that. So those are the different options that you can apply to a fee matrix. And just as a review, some of you maybe came in late. We have 3 different fee matrices that we have created so far. A credit card fee, that's going to be post-discount, so it will calculate everything on a quote post-discount. And the basis will be the price adjusted total, which just means it's going to look at the total price of the cost but ignore this actual fee and only be adding the fee to the total of the quote. And you might have noticed that on the labor and rental fee matrices that I've created, I'm going to do this pre-discount, because what I'm doing with these labor and rental fee matrices is just creating these as a way to show in my total block of the quote how much the labor total is and how much the rental total is. And I want that to be pre-discount, and then I'll show the discount on a separate line in my total block. And the basis that I've used here is respective. And I'm going to be totally honest, I'm not 100% sure what this means within the Flex system, but just as a good practice, usually if we are creating a fee matrix that is just there for display purposes, we're not actually going to add this percentage to the total of the quote. All we're doing is setting this one up to be displayed down here in the total block. But usually when we're doing that, we'll just say that it is respective. I've jumped between respective and price, and I can't quite see a lot of difference between the two. But just as a good practice, I was told that we should always set those up just as a respective. And so maybe now this default percentage might make a little bit more sense to you after you've seen all of the different types of percentages, specific percentages that we could add to a fee matrix. So again, you could do a percentage of just all resource lines on a job. You could do a percentage of only things that pull up as a miscellaneous line. You could do a percentage of specific resource types, a percentage of specific payment terms. So if you were to set a default percentage in here, it would just apply to all of those things. An example of that might be if I just want to charge a 2% fee on every single job that I do, just as either maybe an administrative fee or maybe a cable fee or something like that, I could just put a 2% default percentage in any new fee matrix that I create. And then once I add that as a custom row to my quote, it would just take everything on the entire quote, look at the entire total, and just add a 2% fee to that. And that would be if I just do a default percentage of 2. For the most part, I imagine that you'll probably not use a default percentage very often because most of your fee matrices are going to be very specific as to what kind of percentage you're applying, and that's usually going to be to a specific resource type or a specific line item type or a specific payment term. Okay, so now that we've looked at the different options that you can set up in a fee matrix, let's look at how these actually work and look at the practical applications of these different fee matrices. So the first one, like I said, is our credit card fee. And we set these up to say if you're using a certain payment term, then it will charge a specific percentage. And let me remove one of these just so I can show you how you can add those. So if I want to say for Visa, I want to charge a 2.5% fee, I would just come over here and click Add, and that will add it to the list. And these payment terms can be selected on a quote up in your header block. And so for this particular job, I am using Visa, so let's stick with that as the example at this point. Now again, just creating a fee matrix isn't necessarily going to do anything to your quotes or your invoices. This is just the first step in the process. The second step is that we have to go to our project elements, which is on the projects menu. And we're applying this to our quote first. So let's double click quote to open that. And we're going to go to our custom rows. We need to set up a custom row that's tied to a fee matrix in order for that fee matrix to be able to calculate to the quote element. So what we did was first we clicked Add New Row, and we entered the information into the new custom row. I'm not going to do that now because we already have it created, but I just wanted to show you how to add that new row. But let me show you what the settings are for this particular custom row, the credit card fee. So here's what we did. We gave it a code, and that could match the same code that you gave to the fee matrix itself. This code is going to be used when we add this custom row to the total block of the quote. And then a description is just a description of what this custom row is. And then this is where we get to tying it to the fee matrix. In the calculation method, we didn't choose as entered or as a multiple of a subtotal or anything like that. We're choosing we want the calculation to be based on the fee matrix that we created earlier. In this case, we're using the CC fee, the credit card fee matrix. In the result type, we're calling this a pass-through. Now what this means, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's not actually going to total or anything like that. That just means that when Flex is considering any job costing information, like what is your revenue, what are your expenses, that credit card fee is just going to be considered a pass-through, meaning it's considered both revenue and an expense, so it kind of cancels itself out. Similarly, that's kind of how your sales tax works, because you're not really earning any money, any revenue on sales tax. You're charging it to your customer, but it's also an expense to you, so it just cancels itself out. So that's what we're considering the credit card fee, because it's really not any sort of profit or revenue for you. It's just something that you're charging to your customer, but you're incurring the exact same amount as an expense. And so that's what that means when we say it's a pass-through result type. We're not going to put anything in the resource type here. This is not applicable to a fee matrix. For tax treatment, we're going to say this is not taxable because, again, this is just a fee that we're passing on to our customer, a fee that you get from your credit card company that passes straight to your customer. Transient calculation just means, is this actually going to add to the grand total of the job? So if I were to say it's transient, yes, that just means that it's there for display purposes only. But I actually want this credit card fee to add to the total of the job, so it's not transient. So I'm going to say no there. I might also say that it's waivable, yes, which means it's still going to automatically calculate based on which payment term I use, but I could click into that and zero it out if I want. So maybe in a few particular cases, I might be giving a special deal, or maybe I didn't get a fee from the credit card company, so I could say that it was waived. And then a few other options here that aren't really applicable to this specific fee matrix or this particular custom row. So I'm just going to leave these at no. So if you were adding a new row, then you would have clicked create or add new row. There I just clicked update because I already had it created. And then the last step, if I actually want this to appear as a total block row on my quote, I have to add this to my document views. Before we move on to that though, I just want to make sure that you are very clear that at this point, now that I've created a custom row for my quote element that's using that credit card fee matrix, this is now going to calculate onto your quote. So even if I haven't set it up in my document views yet as a total block row, it's still going to calculate to the total of the quote. And so that's why it's important to be able to add it to the document view so that you can see it down in your total block. Because if your customer doesn't see it, but it's still charging to the total, they might wonder, well, where is that fee coming from? And so that's why we want to add it to our document view so that we can actually see it in our total block. So again, that's just going to be done in our project elements for the quote. We'll go to document views, and we're just going to work in our working view. That's the main view that pops up when you open a quote. And we're only going to be dealing with our total block rows right now. So I'm going to remove this really quick and then just re-add it so you can see exactly how to do it. I'm going to add a new total block row that's called credit card fee. I'm going to use as the field a custom row, and that's going to be the custom row that I created just a minute ago. And then over here is where I'm going to choose which custom row I'm using, and that's going to be the CC fee. Then I have a few other options here. This one is print if zero. I want to say no on this because if there's no credit card fee, if the customer is not using a credit card as their payment term, I don't necessarily need them to see this total block row. So I'm going to say print if zero is no. And then I could choose if it's bold or not. I don't make any of mine bold, so I'll just leave that as no as well. So after I've entered all that information, I'm just going to click add. And then I could move that to wherever I want. I usually like to put it maybe just below my sales tax, but you could put it anywhere in that total block that you want so that your customer will see whatever order you've ordered that in. Whenever you make a change to your document view, you have to click update just to close that window, but then you have to click update again to save all of the changes to your entire quote element. So let's look and see what this looks like now. If we go back to our webinar rental test quote, I'm just going to refresh. And when we open our total block, we're going to see that credit card fee, and it's automatically calculating based on whichever payment term is being used on this job. So for example, since we're using Visa, this is calculating 2.5% on the total, which is subtotal plus your sales tax. It's calculating 2.5 on that. And then it adds it to the grand total. So that subtotal, sales tax, and credit card fee is this grand total. If we change the payment term to Amex, you could see how that fee changes based on whatever percentage I set up in the credit card fee matrix settings. And I could change that to MasterCard as well, and you can see that fee goes up even more. So that's the example of a credit card fee, and you can imagine how you can set this up for several other types of fees that you might be using on your quote. I know I've seen a few of our customers that will set up a fee matrix that's called a handling fee or a cabling fee. And in that case, we might create a new matrix, fee matrix, let's call it cable fee. Give it a code. Calculation method might be a post discount. The basis will be a price because we're actually charging a price. And you might come in here and say on every rental resource type, I charge 2%, and that would be the cabling fee. I could also add retail. If I'm putting retail items on there, I also want to charge 2%. And so if I go through the same process and set up a custom row for that cable fee, and then add that to my document view, then the customer would see a new total block row that's called cable fee that will be charging 2% on all rental and retail items that appear on a quote. And so there's probably quite a few different applications that you could think of to use that for, but those are two examples right there that I see are the most common. Let's go through and look at the labor and rental fee matrices that we created as well. Remember, I created these ones just to be just more of a display to show exactly how much is being charged on this quote for rental items, how much is being charged for labor. These aren't necessarily totaling into the total. It's our subtotal that does the totaling of all the items. I just wanted to show these on my total block as kind of a reference just to show how much they're being charged for each of these resource types. So again, I created a new fee matrix. I'm doing these as pre-discount because I want to show what the total is before any type of discount, and then I'll show what the discount is, if any, and then the subtotal will reflect these totals minus a discount. So that's why I've set these up as a pre-discount. And then I just said that the resource type that I want to calculate the percentage on is just labor for my labor fee matrix. And then for my rental fee matrix, it's just rental. So if we go back to project elements for our quote, we're going to do the same thing by first creating a custom row so that we can get this labor and rental fee matrices to appear on our quote. So in this case, I said the code is just LAB for labor. Again, calculation method was fee matrix. I'm using the labor fee matrix that I set up. The result's going to be a price, but the big difference here is that it's going to be a transient calculation, yes. That just means it's not actually going to total, it's just there for display purposes only. Remember, everything that is a labor resource type on my quote is still going to total into my subtotal, but I just set up this fee matrix just to show, for display purposes, how much the total of labor is. Because I might have labor in multiple subtotals throughout the entire quote, and I just want to show a nice, concise grand total of what labor is. So it's a transient calculation, yes. And I'm going to say this is waivable, no, because I don't necessarily want to be able to click into that labor total block and change it. It's going to be a hard-coded price that represents all of the labor items that are on my quote. And click Update again to save changes for the entire quote element. And I did the same thing for my rental. Just created a new custom row called ren for, that's the code, for rental total, a fee matrix based off of my rental fee matrix. Result type is price. It's not taxable. Transient, yes. And then just like my credit card fee, I went to my document view because I want my customer to be able to see this. So I went into my working view, and in my total block rows, I added a rental total that's based on the custom row of rental that we just created. Print if zero, yes, on this one, because even if they don't have any rental on there, maybe I still want to see them to see that they're not being charged for any rental items. And then I did the same for my labor. So the way this looks on our quote, now it shows me the total of rental, the total of labor, and we could see if we went through and looked at my audio, 639 plus my video, 1106, that looks like that equals 1745. And if we look at all the labor that I have in my quote, it's only in one subtotal, so that's easy, 2100. But also notice I have a few other resource types on this quote, and I wanted to put these on here and leave them on there so that we could set up a couple more of these fee matrices from scratch. Because if we look here, the rental and labor totals do not equal what the subtotal is. So let's set up a couple more of these fee matrices and custom rows to appear on our quotes total block so that we can have a total for everything, including what is the total for retail on this quote, what's the total for travel on this quote, and for any other resource type that I might put on the quote. I could set up a fee matrix, a custom row, and then put it into my total block. So let's run through that really quick. From the start, we go to the Financials menu, click Fee Matrices. We're going to create a new fee matrix, and let's call this Retail Total. Maybe that will be our code. Calculation method will be pre-discount, just like our labor and rental. The basis will be respective because we're just using that for display purposes. And then when we click Save, all we're going to do is go to the resource types and say, this is only going to calculate on our retail resource type at 100%. Let's create another fee matrix really quick for our travel. Again, calculation method should be pre-discount. The basis will be respective because it's just for display purposes. Then we click Save and go to our resource types, choose travel, and we're going to calculate 100% of any travel resource type on our quote. So again, that's just step one. Step two is that we need to go to our project elements. We're going to our quote, and we want to create a custom row for those new fee matrices that we just created. So I'm going to click Add New Row. We're going to call the first one Retail Total. Or actually, that's our code, so we want to do something like that. The description will be Retail Total. Calculation method is a fee matrix. We're going to use the Retail Total fee matrix that we created. The result type will be a price. It's not taxable, and it's transient because it's only there for display purposes. We'll click Add, and that one has been added. And then let's also add a new custom row for our travel total. So again, calculation method is a fee matrix. We'll choose the travel total fee matrix that we created. The result type is a price. It's not taxable, and it is transient because it is only there for display purposes. Let's also click Update just to make sure we save all of those changes. And then our last step, of course, is to go to our document views so that we can have those new custom rows appear in our total block so that the customer can actually see them. So we'll click Total Block Rows. We're going to create a retail total. It's going to use the custom row that we just created, so we'll choose that here. And let's keep it consistent and say print of 0, yes. Add that to our total block, and then we can drag and drop it to wherever we want it to appear. Let's put it right below rental. And then we'll create one more that's called travel total. Use the custom row of trav total, and then add that to our total block. And again, just drag and drop it wherever we want it to go. Let's put it right below labor. Click Update, and then Update again to save all changes for our quote element. And now let's go back and reload this quote, and we can see exactly how that looks. And I might have to do sometimes if it doesn't calculate right away, you just kind of have to refresh the entire total block just by maybe entering something into one of the fields just so it will refresh. But maybe if I just closed out the quote and reopened it, it would have refreshed too. But a lot of times if you have created something new and there's stale data sitting there, you just have to do a hard refresh like that. But now we can see we have totals for each different resource type that appears on this quote that are there just displaying what that total is. And then we have the subtotal, credit card fee, and the grand total. Notice too that if I apply any kind of discount to this job, it isn't going to change these numbers because I set all these up as pre-discount. Because I wanted to show what the total was before any discount, and then I set up my total block to show whatever discount I'm using in the header block here, and then that will show what the subtotal is after that discount. So like I said, there's a few other examples of fee matrices that we can set up, but we're out of time for this webinar, so we will do a part 2 to show some other fee matrices. But you could probably gather from what we did today how you can set up quite a few different types of fee matrices to do exactly what you're looking for. I just want to remind you that as you're setting up a fee matrix, if you go into your project element settings, and if you set up a custom row for that fee matrix, then that will start calculating on your quote or whatever element you are setting up that custom row for. Especially if it's something that's not transient, like that credit card fee, that will be calculating onto your quotes. And you probably will want to go into your document views and set up a total block row so that you can at least see where that charge is coming from. So if you have some ghost calculations that you're seeing on your quote and you don't know why it's not adding up, you might just want to double check and see that you don't have any custom rows set up with a fee matrix that aren't also in your document views like your working view. And then of course also everything that we did to the quote, we'd probably also want to go back into our project element settings and do on our invoice. Most of our customers will start with a quote, and then when they actually need to receive a payment, then they'll send an invoice out to their customer. And so everything that we did to the quote, we'll also want to set up custom rows and put them on the total block of our working view just like we did in the quote, so that those can all push over properly when we create an invoice. So there's a little bit of work there, but it's definitely worth it in the end after you've put some of that work in to be able to have these fee matrices automatically calculating these different things so that you can have your total block showing exactly what you want. If you have any questions about this, or if you want to share any ideas that you've had as you've set up fee matrices, or if you're looking for some help from other customers and to see how other of our customers have used fee matrices and how they're trying to resolve certain problems, I always recommend just going to our forum at forum.flexrentalsolutions.com. We'll post a topic about this specific webinar in the webinars board that you can click on. But of course, you could talk in any of these other boards. If you have more specific questions that might be technical in nature, please email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.